Okay. Oh. Can you hear me? Yes? Loud and clear. Okay, great. I can also more or less hear myself. No? No. Okay. Okay, trying now. Yes. The sound isn't very good, but it's bearable. Okay. Testing, testing. 1, 2. No. How about now? Is that better? Okay, much better. And I cannot hear me, so, that's good. Welcome, everyone. Here comes Jessica with some more instructions. Yeah, no, I turned it down. I turned the volume down.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, yeah. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this final event of the WWF Fossil Fuel Phase Out Day at the Panda Hub Pavilion at COP30 here in Belém. We've had a full day of very interesting events, all focused on the much needed transition away from fossil fuels. And this is our final event, and we have an excellent list of speakers who will be joining us. And the title of the event, of course, is Equinor, Paris-aligned or problematic. I'm going to give a brief introduction before we move on to the presentations and conversations. One of our speakers is not yet here. We're hoping that he will join us at some point, but he's a VIP, so he'll come when he comes. So first of all, my name is Inga Fritzen Buan. I'm Senior Advisor for International Climate Policy with WWF in Norway. I have been in this process in UNFCCC for nearly 2 decades now, but this is the first time I am moderating an event like this, so bear with me. Today's event is focused on Equinor, the Norwegian fossil fuel company, which operates, of course, in Norway, but also internationally, including here in Brazil. So we are delighted to have with us a panel that will be able to speak to this issue from various points of view. We have 2 civil society speakers, Elise from Greenpeace Norway and Fuji from WWF Brazil, who will first give presentations. Then we were supposed to hear from an investor, a shareholder of Equinor from the Danish pension fund Sampension. Unfortunately, the internet is not good enough here to have him on video link. It's also not good enough to download the video that he has kindly sent us, but we will try to attach that to the video recording when we upload it online later. Hopefully we can make it happen. It would be very interesting to hear his perspectives. But we will hear from Hilde Rød, representing Equinor. Hilde is Senior Vice President for Climate and Sustainability at Equinor. And we're very pleased that you have accepted our invitation to come and both listen to us and speak to us. And I think it really reflects a really open spirit. Not every company would agree to come and talk to us about this. Let's say it reflects the spirit of Mutirao that the Brazilians are focusing on here in Belém, which is very similar to something that we have in Norway called dugnad, which the Norwegians in the room know what that is. And I am hoping that being here together and having a good dialogue can reflect our desires to find a common way forward. Lastly, we have invited Norway's Minister of Climate and Environment, Andreas Bjelland Eriksen, and we're hoping he's on the way. And he will then give some reflections in more general terms on how, on the role of governments in ensuring that oil companies operate within the framework of the Paris Agreement and the Convention and what has been agreed under the global stocktake. So thank you all for being here, to the speakers. Now, why the focus on Equinor? There are several reasons why we, as Norwegian NGOs, focus on Equinor. Equinor presents itself as a broad energy company and is diversifying its portfolio. And indeed do spend quite a lot of money on cultivating that image, let's say. But it is still one of the world's biggest fossil fuel companies and one of the most eager companies in opening up new oil and gas projects. Equinor is also Norway's biggest company, and its majority shareholder is the Norwegian government. So the actions of Equinor have impacts for Norway's reputation. Equinor's reputation is Norway's reputation. Next, we do see growing resistance against some of Equinor's international projects in the UK, in Canada, here in Brazil, projects like the Bacalhau, as well as the Vaca Muerta and Mar de Plata in Argentina. In Norway, civil society groups have mobilized against the Wisting field in the Arctic and successfully stopped investment decisions there, or delayed them, hopefully stopped them for good, since the Arctic is a very vulnerable place. Now, the reason we keep challenging Equinor is not because it's the worst company in the industry. It's not. On the contrary, Equinor has on many occasions shown willingness to change its actions after public pressure and dialogue, and I think this meeting is an example of such dialogue. But as Norwegian citizens and co-owners of Equinor, we believe we have a responsibility to push the company towards a transition away from fossil fuels, just as what was agreed 2 years in Dubai in the global stocktake, with the monumental decision to transition away from fossil fuels and tripling renewable energy, a milestone decision of which Norway was one of the principal architects. So now we're going to hear the presentations first from Elise and then from Fuji. So you can, let's get Elise's presentation up on the screen. Elise Åsnes is a campaigner with Greenpeace in Norway and a bit of a UNFCCC veteran herself. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Inga, and thank you for all of you coming here. I'm not a veteran in the 2 decades which you've had, but I've been here for some years now. I work in Greenpeace as a campaigner, and that's what I'm here to talk about. Could you please change slides? Okay, Greenpeace. As the name says, we are a global climate and peace organization. We work a lot with climate, but peace is also at the core of our values and our mission. We have been campaigning against Equinor's fossil fuels expansion for decades. But what we have seen in the last couple of years, there's been an increasing amount of attention and people that are criticizing Equinor, also globally, and hi to our Norwegian climate minister. That's why we've seen that there's so many people, activists, there has been a huge momentum of people being criticized. Equinor has contacted us, and therefore we have, for 2 years now, coordinated this from Norway. In a coalition we have called Equinor Out. So as our question here in the title of our event asked, links to if Norway is in line with the Paris Agreement or not. And a central question in this is Equinor a company in transition? In 2018, Equinor changed names from Statoil to Equinor. It was a huge campaign, relaunched and rebranded themselves as a company who worked with energy, not just oil. However, 6 years on, renewable energy represents 0.6 of Equinor's total energy production. So, in my opinion, it's not yet an energy company. It's still, to a very large extent, an oil and gas company. Here you can see a map. It's from 2023, so it's 2 years ago, of Equinor's assets in the world. What you see here, the pink dots, is the producing fields right now. The yellow ones is under development, and the more darker pink ones are under discovery. So as you can see, Equinor is, to a very large extent, spreading around to the whole world here. And Equinor aims to increase their production, both in Norway and internationally. So they want to expand these dots on this picture. At the core also of our question in whether or not Equinor is in line with the Paris Agreement is Equinor's energy transition plan. The first plan came in 2022. It was a plan us in the environment movement then were not happy with. It had a lot of flaws. It was not good enough. It was focusing a lot on net zero and not having real solutions. However, now in March 2025, Equinor revised their plan. And this plan was less ambitious than the plan they presented only a few years ago. They removed the target of allocating at least 50% of the investments for renewables. And as you can see, they also lowered their target for energy production. So you could conclude with that it's not going in a good direction by lowering their targets. As Inga mentioned, of course, we in the environmental movement, we have for a long time focused on trying to campaign and argue that Equinor as a company really has to change. If you're living up to the name, you really also have to do the changes. But it's not just Equinor's responsibility. It's also the Norwegian state, which is why we have invited a representative of the state here today. Norway, a couple of years ago, Norway produced and launched a white paper on ownership. In this white paper, Norway said that we would have an active ownership and ensure that the different companies we owned ownership or shareholders in, we would have an active ownership demanding that they would be in line with the Paris Agreement. However, these outdraws here, they're from the Norwegian government's written comments to Equinor's AGM. Here, I'm not reading out everything, but in general, it says that they see that the company needs to adapt, but this is up to the company's own board. So they are saying that they feel sure that Equinor's own board is taking this into consideration. Well, it's not. So the truths which many of us are passionate about and spreading the word about is that Equinor is not an energy company. They are expanding their fossil fuel production and aim to be an even bigger oil and gas producer. Currently, Equinor is pursuing many new fields. Rosebank in the UK, Bacalhau and Raia here in Brazil, which we'll hear a lot more about later. Also in Canada, Tanzania, and Argentina, for example. This has led to a growing opposition. One of the latest growing opposition has been in relation to the Rosebank field. Because we've seen that the owners there are also connected to Israel and the occupation of Palestine. So through this, we are combining both the environment movement and the Palestine movement in our demands that Equinor has to go out of this field. So to sum up, of course, in my opinion, and agree with this opinion, Equinor is not in line with the Paris Agreement. We will continue fighting, and we really think it could be possible. Equinor and Norway also has to transition away from fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elisa. We will now have our second presentation from Fuji, and I'll also take the opportunity to welcome the Minister of Climate and Environment from Norway, Andreas Bjelland Eriksen, who is now sitting here in the front row. Thank you so much for taking the time. Yeah, I'm sure you have seen the schedule you are not on yet. So Fuji, take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your attention. I'd like to talk a bit about what Equinor is doing in Brazil. This is a picture from its FPSO, which will be the largest operating FPSO in Brazil. Well, and I think would be interesting, this one, to show something about the field that FPSO will operate. It's a large field, one of the largest in Brazil. And interesting enough, some third-party analysis indicated that its environmental impact assessment could have underestimated some impacts from its operations. There are a few gaps. I pointed 3. First one being insufficient.
We understand that town hall COPs are where we bring communities together.
Wow. I've been hacked.
Big cities or very small.
May I?
And every town, every city.
Sometimes it works. Yeah. The first one being the insufficient evaluation of deep sea ecosystem. That area is particularly sensitive according to analysis that were done. But maybe most important, there are limited baseline data on potential oil spill dispersion. That's a problem that unfortunately not only occurs in this project, not only occurs in Equinor's projects in Brazil, but pretty much all, or at least the majority of projects that are licensed in Brazil. With underestimation of its potential impacts, the investments and countermeasures that companies must get prepared are much lower and much cheaper. But also, an important point, usually disregarded by people that organize the public hearings, the public consultations, is that we had weak social environmental responses for concerns posed by artisanal fishers in coastal communities. The licensing process was held at the top of COVID, and hearings were online through Zoom or any similar system, and most of these fisheries and communities weren't able to properly participate on it, so their concerns weren't heard and responded properly as we think. This is not only happening in this project, but it's a problem that we had in many other projects. Please go on. But that project has some years, but I wonder if we are supposed to keep having the same problem. Recently, this year, Equinor acquired the SM 1617 block, which is also in southwest part of Brazil, an offshore block, and is located at the end of what is called Cananea Canyon, an ecological critical deep sea system, according to an environmental zoning held by federal government agency. The area is classified as high environmental sensitivity, so which demands very careful analysis, environmental assessments, and licensing process. That analysis, another assessment from the Ministry of Environment stressed that drilling in that area could pose elevated risk due to ocean currents and biological connectivity in nearby areas. Hence, the report recommends stricter licensing conditions and expanding marine spatial planning before any new seismic or drilling activity. The problem is we still don't have the marine spatial problem. It's not responsible for the oil companies, but still we are not able to properly organize, explore, or utilize our offshore and coastal area. Please go on. And then, maybe mostly important is to question ourselves if Equinor is driving energy transition in Brazil. And an analysis that we held for a similar project, not the same, but the general numbers are comparable in the sense that we run a case study for a large project. But an important message is that comparable investments in biofuels, wind or solar power would yield higher social and employment benefits than offshore oil production. Certainly, in the case of Brazil, we would have lower job intensity and local value added from Bacalhau project than equivalent renewable projects in terms of invested amount. Even if oil development offers short-term fiscal returns, it increases Brazil's exposure to global price volatility and stranded asset risk. Certainly, that asset is owned by Equinor, but we have seen other times when the oil prices get lower, operations, projects, jobs, and communities, even whole cities get in trouble because of the decreased activity and revenues. Finally, renewable energy investments provide great long-term resilience, particularly in Brazil, not only, certainly, but in Brazil is very profitable. We have a private financial market that loves to invest in this area. It is easy to get funding and opportunities for projects in renewables in Brazil. Finally, to highlight some of... I'm being hacked, I think. Finally, to show some overall numbers for that analysis, for a large FPSO, smaller than Bacalhau's FPSO, but nonetheless a very large, 120,000 barrels a day for 3 years operation and a high productivity. And considering that we have social costs from the externalities of CO2 emissions of $50 per ton, the social net present value, which equivalates to revenues minus costs minus externalities from carbon alone, we are not considering any other externality, is for all the IEA scenarios of oil prices and emissions. The first one being the stated policy scenarios, which is pretty much baseline in a business as usual scenario. Even that case, for such a large project, which would hinder a lot of revenues, but when we consider their costs, what we call social net present value would be only $1 billion in the total project lifespan. I would like to let you see that number. Even in a business as usual scenario, such a large project would at the end hinder only $1 billion of social net present value. With announced pledge scenarios, which is an intermediate scenario, the net social present value would be even lower, and the net zero emission scenario even worse. Comparing this reference investment in oil and gas, equivalent amount of investment would render if invested in renewable energy, solar, wind, biomass would render $5 billion of social net present value. Finally, it's worth mentioning that number, that methodology, the social net present value, was established by the Brazilian government to analyze the worthiness of investing public or private resources in large projects. So it was not invented by us. It was produced by the Ministry of Finance to try to analyze in the long term what investments make more sense for the society. So back to you, Inga.
Thank you, Fuji. Now, as I mentioned, we were supposed to have via video link a representative of the Danish pension fund manager Sampension, Jakob Ehlert Jørgensen, but unfortunately the internet here simply isn't good enough to have him via video link, and the video recording has also not uploaded. But I can just very quickly mention why we had invited him to come and speak. And so Jakob Jørgensen is the head of ESG at Sampension. Sampension filed a shareholder resolution at Equinor's annual general meeting this year, together with other large international investors, to push for the company to align its strategy and investments with the Paris Agreement's 1.5-degree goal. So his company, his pension fund or pension fund manager, is an example of active investments, active investors who are using their shareholder their stocks actively to push a company in the direction of a safer climate future and the energy transition that we need. But unfortunately, it will not happen today. So next on our agenda then is Hilde Rød. And as I said initially, we are very pleased that you are here to speak to us. So Hilde is Senior Vice President for Climate and Sustainability at Equinor. And she's joining us to provide some comments from Equinor's point of view on what we have just heard. And if you want to, feel free to also reflect on the COP, on what you on the role that you see in this larger process of companies like Equinor. Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay, still can't hear me, can you? Okay, I can't hear myself, but that's it's good if you can. So thank you for inviting me. First of all, I think it's good to be here and to have a good dialogue about the company that I represent and our role in the energy transition. And you asked first on reflections on COP. I have to say I think it's great to be here and see. I've attended panel discussions on various topics from the future of energy to carbon capture and storage, etc. And it's great to see the focus on implementation and the focus on action among many of the business delegations here. So I want to say to you, first of all, I think there is quite a lot that we do agree upon. We agree that we need to transform the energy system, and I think we also agree that we need to transform Equinor. And that is also why we have transition at the very core of our strategy. We are aiming to become a broad energy company. We are very much an oil and gas company at the moment, with activities in renewables and low carbon solutions. But this is the growth area for us. The long-term direction is clear. the road is rather bumpy, I think, both for nations and for companies when it comes to transition. It's not an even and straightforward road. You have years where there happen a lot, and then you have years where there are more headwinds. And we see some headwinds in some sectors for transition now. The growth areas for us are in renewables and low carbon solutions. But we also aim to maintain oil and gas production, and we've said that we want to maintain that until 2035. We are not expanding internationally. On the contrary, we have consolidated and left a number of countries. So the core countries for us are Norway, that's the backbone, and where we have 2/3 of our production. Very well regulated country and also part of the EU emission trading system. We have Brazil as another core country where we do both renewable oil and gas, also renewables through our fully owned subsidiary Rio Energy, who invest in solar and wind. And we also have the United Kingdom, where we have also projects both in oil and gas and offshore wind and CCS and hydrogen, actually. So and then the US. So transition, I just attended a panel on the future of energy with DNV, who give out scenarios. And transition takes time. The energy system is still 80% based on fossil fuels. Renewables is growing at an enormous scale, particularly onshore wind and solar, electric vehicles, batteries. But there are also sectors where things go much slower than expected. Offshore wind, unfortunately, which is our core and where we have a competitive edge, we believe, and an important area for us, is one of the industries that has really faced headwinds lately. Costs have been increasing, squeezes in supply chain, inflation, etc. So I think you've all seen that a lot of offshore wind projects have been maybe slowed down and going slower than expected. That doesn't change our belief in offshore wind, but it does change the pace of how much we can invest and when. To sort of, there were a lot of things mentioned here, and one of the things was only 0.6% of our energy mix comes from renewables. It's a bit more, but it's not a lot. And you can find the numbers. We report very transparently on this in our annual report. Why is that? Well, it's because where we are focused in renewables is primarily in offshore wind. Investing in those kind of projects, like similar to the oil and gas projects, takes time. So one example, we have 3 mega projects within offshore wind in our portfolio under development. Baltic in Poland, Dogger Bank in the UK, that's the world's largest offshore wind project, and Empire Wind in the US, which you might have also heard, where there has been some headwinds and a stop and a start again lately. Dogger Bank, to give an example, the licenses were awarded, I think, in 2013. Production is starting now, not because we are a slow developer, because it takes time. Licensing, permitting, all the rounds that are needed, the impact assessments, etc., and then finally building the project. So the lead time for this kind of project is long. So you can't really look at, of course you're allowed to look at what we have now, but this will change over time, but it takes a few years. And these 3 projects will not come into production until later in 26, 27, etc. So there is a time element here and a time lag. And then, yes, we have adjusted some of our ambitions, and we did that at our last capital markets update because of the headwinds we see, both in offshore wind, but also carbon capture and storage, which is one of our other key areas. And we're very proud because we also see progress within particularly CCS. And this year is a milestone year for a project that we do together with the Norwegian government, Northern Lights and the Longship project, which is the world's first open source carbon capture and storage project. It's based in Norway, and we had the first shipload of CO2 shipped to this project and injected this autumn. So, and I was very lucky to see the specially built ship for this collecting the CO2 sailing by my office earlier this autumn. So that's something we're very proud of, and it also shows that the role that we can play in the transition is also to enable other sectors to reduce their emissions. For example, cement, steel industry, etc., that are hard to abate sectors. But this is also an area that is very dependent on the right policy frameworks, regulations, etc., and the kind of partnership that the Norwegian government has been very instrumental in building. So this is where we are, and just want to say finally also, when it comes to Brazil, my understanding and knowledge of and also knowing the Brazilian team we have here, who are very, very dedicated, is that Brazil has a very strict environmental regulations and very strict permitting processes. Bacalhau was mentioned, that just came on stream. That is the first project in the world to use a combined cycle gas turbine, voluntary measure to reduce CO2 and methane emissions. And we will use the same at Raia, which is the next oil and gas project we have in Brazil. So I think those who know us also know that we have a very good standing when it comes to doing oil and gas projects as carbon efficient as possible. And we take a lot of pride in that, because oil and gas is still needed for many, many years to come, and we believe that how we produce it is actually very important. So that's why we work very hard to reduce our own emissions, and also working very hard with our partners wherever we are in the world to do the same. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Hilde. Very interesting reflection. So we are going to test and see if the video from Sampensjon works anyway. And I can see Dana and Jessica very hard at work back there. We move on first? Yes? Yeah? Okay. Then I have the pleasure of introducing Andreas Bjelland Eriksen, who is the Minister of Climate and Environment for Norway. And we're very pleased that you took the time to be here with us today. I'm sure you're very busy. We have asked the Minister to reflect on the role that authorities have in ensuring that oil companies operate within the framework of the Paris Agreement. Feel free to reflect also what this means for the implementation of the global stocktake and the role that Norway played as really an architect behind the very important decisions that we got 2 years ago in Dubai. And feel free also to reflect on your expectations for this COP. And after that, I do hope that we have some time for some questions and reflections maybe from the audience as well. Andreas, take it away.
Thank you so much for that. Can you hear me? Excellent. And really great being here. I must say that unfortunately, perhaps, there are not too many of these types of discussions during the COP, where an oil and gas company is present, a government is present, but also an environmental NGO is present. And I think these are the talks we actually need more of to be able to get to the concrete solutions that we need to see if we are to achieve the targets that we're working towards under the Paris Agreement. I should just briefly say as an introductory measure that it's not my ministry who is responsible for the ownership, the government ownership in Equinor. It's the Ministry of Business and Industry, and that is how it should be, because my ministry is responsible for environmental licensing. So the fact that we are independent from the ownership that the Ministry of Business and Industry conducts is quite important. But nevertheless, we, for obvious reasons, have a big role to play in how we follow up the transitioning away and the everyday work that companies like Equinor does in Norway. I think there is one thing that we perhaps haven't talked enough about in this session yet, at least. And that perhaps could be my sort of addition to what has been said already. And that is, of course, that businesses, they do not operate in a vacuum. They operate based on market incentives and on market regulations. And sometimes when I hear businesses and financial institutions, it almost sounds like markets are something that is magically created out in nature. That is not true. Markets are created by politicians, and we can form markets over time and ensure that markets transition in the way which we would like to see. That is also true for climate and for emission reductions and for how the energy transition is developing going forward. Therefore, for the Norwegian government, it's been very important to create policies that ensure that we phase out emissions over time and that all sectors, including the oil and gas sector in Norway, is liable to a believable plan for how that can actually happen. At the same time, it's important for Norway that that cannot only be done by domestic policy alone. And why is that? Well, Norway is a small country of 5.5 million people. Almost all the oil and gas that we produce, we deliver to the European energy market. 100% of our gas goes to Europe. Approximately 85% of the oil that we produce in Norway go to Europe. Therefore, ensuring that we solve the coordination problem, which really is talked too little about on the international climate stage, I believe, between producing countries and consuming countries, and have a coherent policy between the two, that's quite important if we're actually going to achieve the energy transition and the transitioning away from fossil fuels that we talked about during the COP28 in Dubai. That is why the key element or instrument that we have in domestic policy to be able to achieve this over time is Norway's participating in the European quota system. And what the quota system does is, of course, quite easy. It sets a boundary today of how much businesses in Europe can emit. Now, with the confirmation of EU's climate target for 2040 of 90%, it also basically confirms that there will be no quotas left, at least net no quotas left in approximately 2040, ensuring that whether it's an oil and gas company, a transportation company, an energy producer in Europe, everyone has to reduce their emissions in line with the quota target that is set. How energy companies or transportation companies or other companies actually do that in practice is not for me to solve. And that I also think is quite a good idea. I have a professional background as an energy regulator, so I know quite a bit about energy technologies, but I'm not necessarily the best one of adopting the concrete solutions that each industry, each business actually need to develop to be able to achieve that over time. And it does to a certain extent, and I know that there are people in this room who disagree with that there are a specific role to play for oil and gas also in the market when we achieve zero quotas. If companies like Equinor succeed with carbon capture and storage, for example, obviously there can be some projects based on carbon capture and storage. But the essence of that transition and of the ETS system is that we are going to utilize a lot less oil and gas in Europe in the near future than we are today, which also means that companies like Equinor are going to produce much less oil and gas in the future than what they do today. When we look at the foresight for the Norwegian oil and gas sector, we know that we need a transition not only based on climate policy, but also based on businesses, jobs, value creations, economic opportunities in Norway. By 2050, we expect the oil and gas production in Norway to fall by approximately 70%. And I think that's going to be a challenge for certain areas of Norway, but it's also a great opportunity to grasp what is going to happen in offshore wind, in carbon capture and storage, in hydrogen, in green shipping, for example, with the transition that is going to happen in the next couple of years. And therefore, we support the domestic climate policy with help for businesses to develop new technologies, develop new opportunities all along the Norwegian coastlines to enable us to be able to do that in practice. To me, climate policy starts with ambition, and I think that's really important for this COP. This is the year of new NDCs. And I'm proud that Norway's NDC for 2035 is one of the few that has gotten the green light for being 1.5 aligned. That does not make it easy to achieve, but I think it's much, much better to set the bar high and to strive to get to that bar than setting the bar low and making it easy for yourself to jump over it. To achieve that, we have to stay steadfast on the message towards oil and gas companies. They have to cut their emissions and they have to be a part of the energy transition in Europe in line with the development that is going to happen in the European trading system going forward. That is the baseline that everyone has to follow, regardless of whether they like it or not. And if we as government can stay committed to that over time, then it becomes believable for the market as well. And then boardrooms have to regard that when they are conducting their investments. Therefore, that is also the most efficient strategy for influencing what companies are going to do going forward. Because, of course, as an owner, whether it's a government owner or a private owner, you can always tell a company what you would like them to do. And if you own the company, they have to do what you say, in essence, as well. So in many ways, it seems like an efficient strategy. Unfortunately, if you don't change the underlying market regulations, other companies are going to conduct the same business that they always done before. Therefore, I think it's absolutely crucial to get regulations right. In Europe, we are close to that. We're not over the finish line. We're going to have some really, really tough regulations and also technology developments that we need to be able to conduct in the next couple of years to get where we want to be. But I think the basis for coordination between oil and gas, where it's produced and where it's consumed, is a quite good one for getting us over the line. At the same time, I think that the same discussion is lacking a little bit in the international climate discussion. The same discussion about how we solve this global coordination problem between oil and gas production and oil consumption and the targets in the GST of transitioning away from fossil fuels in practice. I have many ideas of how this can be done. Perhaps we can briefly touch upon some of them in the questions afterwards. But if I'm just going to mention one, I think it's a great problem that under Article 2.1c on financing in the Paris Agreement today, we basically do not have any working stream within the Paris Agreement framework to work on financial flows continuously. I think that is the area where we really have to solve this, to discuss how if we cannot put a global CO2 price in place or a global regulation in place, what can we put in place that ensure that we get the same kind of coordination between producing companies and consuming companies, and the fact that everyone sees the same picture of how we need to gradually, over time, steadfast, commit to reducing emissions each and every year. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you so much, Andreas. All right, we have about 10 minutes left of our allotted time. So I would like to just open the room to any questions or comments from anyone who is here. Or you have the video ready. Oh, really? Okay, let's try it. And then we have 5 minutes afterwards for some questions.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak and to share Sam Pension's view on Equinor. Short about myself and Sam Pension. My name is Jakob Elert Jørgensen. I'm head of ESG at Sam Pension. The Sam Pension Group consists of 4 pension funds and has approximately $50 billion under management. We run a net zero strategy across the entire asset base and have pretty clear views on what we think good climate behavior looks like. A little bit about our work with Equinor. We have engaged Equinor over some years together with other investors, both through meetings with the company and through meetings with its majority shareholder, the Norwegian state. And we have also put forward shareholder proposals the last 2 years jointly with other investors. I would like to cover 2 things primarily in this short presentation. First, the role of Equinor itself and how we see its climate strategy. And second, the role of the majority shareholder, the Norwegian state. With respect to Equinor, I'd like to first be clear that we fully support the company's efforts to become Paris aligned. We are investors in the company. We like the company and we think it has the potential to make a real contribution to the green transition. We believe the company has shown progress and has done a lot of things right, but it is also doing things that we believe are clearly not in line with Paris. Our primary issue with the current strategy is the continued exploration and expansion, i.e. search and development for new oil and gas fields. This is not without nuance. There's definitely a case for some new development close to home, i.e. the Norwegian continental shelf, primarily related to energy security and gas in pipelines from Norway, coming into the EU, carrying less emissions than imported LNG. However, we don't see a case for new international fields. We simply don't see that there's a real energy security argument for those, and we definitely don't see that there is a transition fuel argument either. In essence, we don't think that there is an argument at all that international fields, such as the Brazilian ones, are Paris-aligned at all. We have noted the company's argument that the Paris Agreement is for states and not for companies. This is obviously true from a technical point of view, but from a systemic point of view, we don't think the argument is very well reasoned. The asks of the Paris Agreement and the supporting work of the IPCC and the IEA and others are pretty clear. Emissions must come down. All actors, irrespective of their place in the system, must do what they can do to support it. This is not about interpretation of the Paris Agreement. It is being clear. This is about value. It is about values. It is about what you as an individual actor in the system are doing when you take decisions, it being you as a consumer, you as a business, or you as a politician. This brings me to the other main point I would like to put a few words to, the role of the majority shareholder, the Norwegian state. The Norwegian state holds a direct ownership of more than 65% of equity in Equinor, meaning it has full control of the company. This means real responsibility, and it also means that the Norwegian state has all the tools it needs to effect change. From a corporate governance perspective, it means two things. One, the Norwegian state needs to be clear in the direction it sets for the company, and I think, to be fair, it has been pretty clear in stating that it expects Equinor to set targets and implement measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. And secondly, the Norwegian state needs to be effective in ensuring that this also happens in reality, i.e. that the ambition it holds on behalf of the company moves from paper to actual implementation. And our current view is that the Norwegian state is not effective on this last point, meaning that it has allowed the company to execute on a strategy which, in our view, is clearly not in line with Paris. So, to briefly sum up, Equinor is on its way, but it is not running a climate strategy that I would consider Paris-aligned. Two, the majority shareholder, the Norwegian state, has been clear in its expectations towards the company, but it has also failed to get that across in an effective way. Thus, we believe both parties have work in front of them. We very much welcome the opportunity to continue to work with both Equinor and the majority shareholder to move the company forward. Thank you.
Very, okay, no, can't hear me? Okay, how about now? Hello? Okay. Wonderful work, Jessica and Dana, getting the video up, and I think that that was a nice, more or less, conclusion to our event. We have a couple minutes for some questions or comments from anyone in the room. Please just raise your hand. Please also introduce yourself and direct your question maybe to one of our speakers. Let's see, is there anyone who wants to raise a question or raise an issue? We might all be ready for dinner, and I completely understand that. Okay. All right, then I think we can close this off, and I would like to once again thank our speakers for coming here, for taking the time out of their busy schedule. And we wish everybody the best of luck with the rest of the COP, particularly you, Andreas. I think you will be maybe involved in some consultations at some point. So yeah, we look forward to seeing what the COP brings. Best of luck, everyone. Thank you.
This is